and I'm going to go directly to this, and it's going to take up a little bit of time, so I'm sure the chair will be able to join in once she arrives. But I'd like to bring up the next item. Item 6 on our agenda is a discussion of an elected charter study commission as authorized by Chapter 801 of the Acts of 1985, and the steps to initiate the process. And joining us for this discussion will be obviously our county administrator, Michael Dutton, and our Barnstable County counsel, Michelle Randazzo from KP Law. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Michael, to sort of introduce the subject and the topic, and introduce Michelle.
Thank you. As the commissioners know, there's been quite a bit of discussion, not so much in this forum, but throughout other forums on the Cape about implementing an elected charter study commission to review the county charter. The discussions have sort of ramped up since the Assembly's charter review process began, which is, for those that don't know, is distinctly different from the elected Charter Study Commission process. Our current charter requires that the Assembly convene every 5 years and study the charter and, appoint a charter study committee and our charter committee, and then review the charter and come up with recommended changes. That has been going on since the spring, and right now it's probably an opportune time to figure out if the commissioners want to trigger an elected charter study commission. And so I thought it best to ask our counsel, Michelle Randazzo, to sort of weigh in on the process and the timing and what needs to be done if the commissioners choose to pull that trigger and adopt a resolution, which would then trigger an elected charter study commission.
So before I turn it over to Michelle, I just want to just be very, very clear. We've talked about this quite a bit,
right,
in prior commissioner meetings, and for folks that are sort of new to this and hearing this sort of firsthand, just to give a little bit of background, for many, many years, there have been various boards, various groups that have looked at our charter and have recommended that we make some changes. That from time to time, there have been conflicts, there have been disagreements between various boards, and that there needs to sort of be some process in place to reconcile that. A very common form throughout Massachusetts and elsewhere is to create an elected charter commission. Municipalities do this all the time. It happens, and it's happened on numerous occasions on Cape Cod. And so I believed, and I brought this up in prior board meetings, that we need to take the same approach and be seen in a negative light, but it should be seen as a positive light to draw a lot of interest and awareness and understanding about what Barnstable County does and some of the problems that will need to be fixed, and to bring a fresh set of eyes to the whole discussion. And under the process that Michelle is going to sort of brief us on is the process by which the public is engaged, and ultimately it's brought before the board. The thing that I like about this process is that it reduces the divisive rhetoric and some of the disagreements that may exist, some of the tension, and it sort of moves that whole dialogue into a whole different area and arena, and allows us to focus on doing our business. So we've talked about it before, and I think we put this on the agenda as an issue to try to come to some resolution on this month. So now's the time to sort of refresh our own thinking about this topic and to get updated on exactly how this works. So we've asked Michelle to join us today to help us understand just how this whole elected charter commission process would work. And so Michelle, we're going to turn it over to you. And
thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all, albeit virtually. As Commissioner Forrest has indicated, an elected charter commission is really, the heart of it is to try and get input from, different representatives from all over the Cape, and I'll explain the election process in a minute, but also emphasizing the need to hold public hearings, public forums throughout their tenure to really publicize the work and give public the opportunity for input in terms of what might be the final recommendations. I thought I'd start with a little timeline because this is not a quick process. I don't know, can I share my screen just so you can see?
Give it a shot. Ian, can you do that?
Should be able to.
Ian says you can, your screen can be shared.
Do you see it? Do you see me still or the screen share?
We still see you. We enjoy seeing you, but
I know.
we don't see the screen.
Yeah, if I can't, it seems not to be letting me do it. So I'll just go through the timeline very quickly.
That would be great.
Okay. So basically, if the Board of Commissioners were to adopt a resolution to elect a charter commission, the deadline to file with the Secretary of State would be the last Tuesday in February of 2026. And so by my calculations, that's February 24th of 2026. I do think because charter commissions on the county level are not the most common, I do think it's better not to wait till the last minute because if there's some questions that the Secretary of State has, we have the opportunity to, if necessary, try and answer those questions or vote again if we need to. The Chapter 801 of the Acts of 1985 does not set forth the form of the resolution, but it does set forth the form of the ballot question. And then so we would recommend that the resolution that the board, if it so chooses to adopt a resolution, would really mirror the ballot question. It's pretty straightforward. Basically be it resolved that the Board of Regional Commissioners, that a question be placed on the upcoming biennial state election ballot, that a charter study commission be elected in accordance with the language of the ballot question. So this is all, the election itself would be at the November 2026 state biennial election. And on the ballot would be not only the question to elect a charter study commission, but also the election of the members of the commission. One person from each of the towns. Their nomination papers need to be submitted no later than the 10th Tuesday before the election, which I have calculated as August 25th, 2026. And so there will be two questions that appear on the November 2026 ballot. Both, shall there be an elected charter study commission, and then also an election of the members. It's a pretty minimal number of signatures that I think it's 20 signatures to submit on nomination papers. The Secretary of State prepares the nomination papers once it receives the resolution to put the question on the ballot. Then, of course, the election is November 3rd. If the Charter Study Commission is in fact elected, then within 20 days after that election, the sum of $35,000 gets automatically credited without the need for further appropriation to the Charter Commission's account. The county can appropriate more money through its normal appropriation process if it feels there's a need for more. The elected Charter Commission, by definition in the Chapter 801, has access to the staff and resources of the county government. The commission has 18 months to issue a final report. So by my rough math, that's May of 2028, with the goal of putting any changes on the ballot in November 2026, okay? Once they issue their final report, they're required to publish it. All the recommended amendments.
That's me. Sorry.
That's you, Michael?
That was me.
All right, we got it fixed.
All right. All of the recommended amendments, together with a publication of summaries and analyses, needs to be published at least for 2 successive weeks. And a summary of the ballot question to amend the charter has to go to the Secretary of State no later than the first Wednesday in August. and I've calculated that as August 8th, 2028. So you see that this is, a 2-year, 2.5, almost 3-year process. And I have sent to Michael my timeline, just so he has it. I do encourage folks with better math skills than I, even though I did use an online date calculator, to come up with those target dates. Okay, so that's the timeline. I think you're in a good position right now if you're going to vote a resolution in the next, month or two, that you would be able to get that up to the Secretary of State and then get any feedback as necessary from the Secretary of State before that February deadline for the final for the ballot question to have been received. So that's the timeline.
There you go.
Do you folks want to stop me with any questions, or I'll keep going just briefly on process?
I think it might be good just to keep going
Yep,
briefly on
I
process,
agree.
and then we can go into questions.
So there's 15 elected members, one from each town. And as I said earlier, they need 20 signatures on nomination papers. There are also 4 non-elected members. It's each member of the Board of Regional Commissioners or their designee, and the Speaker of the Assembly or their designee. Okay. Like the Assembly, like each Assembly member has weighted votes, all the commission members have weighted votes as well. And for the 15 elected members, it's weighted based on their population. And the 4 non-elected members, it's a weird math. Basically, you take the average of all the weighted votes divided by 15, and that's the percentage of weighted votes assigned to each of the 4. Again, it's math, not my strong suit, but I think the Assembly is used to dealing with the weighted votes, and that math can, people better at math should be able to calculate that out. But that's the commission itself. Once it's elected and the 4 the non-elected ex officio members are on it, there would need to be that sort of calculation of the weighted votes. And then at the first organizational meeting, if a charter study commission is elected, they would organize, they would appoint a chair and other officers, do a schedule for meetings, and begin the tough work. Again, it's a maximum 18-month process. Once they come to their final report, that is published in various ways. It's forwarded to the county clerk and various other, the county clerk then distributes it to all the towns, their elected officials, and provides it to the Assembly, also the county's legislative delegation, and the Secretary of State. You also need to print a bunch of copies and make them available on your website so that folks can readily access them. So in that 18-month period, the elected charter commission can hold as many public forums as it would like. Those are all that schedule is something I think that would be decided by the commission sort of initially at the initial or very soon after the initial meeting. My sense is that there's work to be done administratively by the commission with sort of how they're going to operate, how frequently they're going to meet, and then ultimately when is a good time to start involving the public through a public hearing process. So again, a lot of work in the next 18 months. They can be done sooner, but any final changes to be voted on would not be voted on until the November 2028 election.
That's
I have a question.
Sure.
Michelle, so since there is an election of 15 people from 15 towns, and then there's an appointed person to represent the Assembly and the commissioners, that means, does that mean that, say, one of the Assembly members wants to run? Does that exclude their ability to run?
There's no exclusion. And honestly, there's an argument that all of the Board of Regional Commissioners could also run and assign a different delegee as a representative. I think that might be a little complicated, but there is no exclusion for any of the existing elected representatives on the Assembly or the Board of Regional Commissioners from running.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think it's an excellent point that you raise. I think from what I've observed in other elected charter commissions is when incumbent select board members, for example, have attempted to do it, they've actually had difficulty getting elected because I think the public understands the process is to bring a fresh set of eyes. And I do recall the other point is that in 1988, when we did this, the incumbent county commissioners felt very strongly that rather than they individually participate, that they set designees to participate on their behalf and come to the task with a fairly broad perspective without any sort of preconceived ideas. I think the idea was to make sure that we had an abundance of talent and fresh eyes looking at the charter. And I think, quite frankly, they did a great job. The final point that I just want to add is that for anybody interested in the details of this, Sonia Sheasley, our communications director, has done a great job in posting the all this information. The chapter 801, which we've been talking about, that's posted on our website, along with the 1988 ballot question and also the 1988 Charter Commission report and recommendations from those folks. So our website has a lot of very good information about how this process works. So I just want to just get that out there so that if people have questions, there's a place that they can go to get some background information. And I think should we decide to go forward with it, I think as we have information like the information that Michelle has given us, I think we should post that information and make that widely available as well.
Yes, Ron.
Yeah, in answering Mark and Sheila's question, one has to presume that if we pass this resolution recommending a charter review committee, that we can't put provisions in it that are not included in the actual law that cites the committee. I mean, we in passing that resolution can't predetermine who can and cannot serve on it. Is that right?
Absolutely not. That's correct.
All right. Then the other question in process is on the November, just whatever recommendations this committee makes coming to the ballot in November of 2028, there's also going to be both commissioners and assembly delegates on the ballot. And we can't presume that the recommendations of the committee are going to be adopted. And if those recommendations include eliminating or changing the term of office or so on, what do we do about that? I mean, are you going to have people running for office in case we don't know whether that office is going to exist or not? So the question is, what do you do as we approach that election? The people who will be running.
That's not terribly atypical with respect to, for example, on the municipal level, when there's elected positions that are going to be converted to appointed. And so that could be something that the Charter Study Commission considers in its recommendations. And if the intention is to eliminate a certain elected position, they ought to make provision for how that would be handled, right? And because if the Charter Commission decides to amend this charter via special act, which is what I think is most likely if there's going to be amendments, because you have a form of government that was created by special act. And so I would expect that that's going to be the path that follows, rather than, sort of wholesale adopting a different form of organization than based on the options that were originally available under Chapter 801. But there's the flexibility within that to make provision for how you handle the status of elected positions. Sometimes there's specific language says that, upon passage of this or within so many days, their terms shall terminate if in fact it is a recommendation that certain elected offices be eliminated, and that is voted on the ballot in November 28th.
Yeah, but as my issue is not so much the process. My issue is from a political standpoint. As we approach the election of November 2028, you're going to have people who are going to run for, in other words, people run for assembly delegates, people run for county commissioners. If the recommendations are that those positions be eliminated or changed, it's very unlikely that people are going to In other words, you can't start with the presumption that the recommendations of the committee are going to pass. So they're going into a situation where maybe they'll get elected, maybe there'll be a position there, maybe there won't. So will people run for these offices if they'll be eliminated? I mean, that's the question.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not within your legal issue, but it's a very practical issue. Is somebody going to take the time and effort to run for county commissioner from Bourne to Provincetown if they find out that position is going to be eliminated? If the recommendation is going to be that position is going to be eliminated, and if the recommendation is that position is going to be eliminated, why would anybody waste the time to presuming that it's going to the recommendations of the committee are going to fail? So what do you do?
My thinking is the only thing that concerns me is that there's going to be people on the ballot, and then there's this question and this slate of commission people who are going to be elected to this commission. So that in itself will be confusing, and that's going to take a lot of PR to get that straight. But after, if they decide something's going to get eliminated, the Board of Commissioners or the Assembly or whatever, they could say at the end of that term, that is when that office will, they could make that judgment. They're going to ride out their term. We've made this decision and there's 8 months before the next election. So we're going to say this does not go into effect until such a date where the people who are now in place would ride out their term, and then it's an appointed or whatever.
And that was my point about amendments via special act.
Right.
You have more flexibility to
Right.
make provision for that. And the other point that I would raise is that, baked into this process is transparency in the charter commissions, right? One would assume that well before the November, 28 election, that there will be a fairly reasonable sense about what structural changes, if any, to the elected positions are going to be recommended. So I don't really think it's going to be, and I could be wrong. It could be a very very well thought out process, and it may take people a long time to get to what the final recommendation is. But I'm going to assume that that's going to become apparent, through the process and not necessarily just by the time the final report is issued. So hopefully folks who have been paying attention and the Charter Commission has been publicizing its efforts, that will be something that will be apparent to potential candidates, in advance of May 2028.
Go ahead.
It will be apparent what changes the committee recommends. What won't be apparent is whether the voters will actually approve that. So, you won't know until the day after the election of November 2028 whether those changes go into place or not. So the people who are running for office or proposing to run for office won't know whether what environment they're going into, whether their offices will be existing or not. We're making the presumption that this charter, not the presumption, but sort of that the presumption is that this charter committee will make the recommendations to the voters. I assume they don't have to go through the legislature, but they have to go to the Secretary of the Commonwealth. Making a presumption it'll pass, but there is no presumption because,
Correct.
as we've seen before, recommended changes immediately engender opposition from those who will be affected. So there's going to be a battle.
Right.
And we're going to go into the election of November 2028 without knowing what's going to happen in the day after. That's what I'm saying.
In the worst case scenario would be electing the Assembly to be on there, because there we are at the same place we are now. It would be unfortunate if they felt we're going to all run for that commission and people aren't really aware and they get elected and then we're here and, it's just not.
Yeah.
So it's unfortunate you can't make a provision that that anybody elected cannot participate in this because there are different views. And that's where we are now in just the regular charter review. I mean, this conversation came up. I mean, I think there's a lot of other work the Charter Commission can do. They really haven't looked at the charter and what could be changed or cleaned up or made more clear. But it went into the structure, and you can just see it would be just where we are. Nothing would happen. Nothing would change.
Just let me say, I agree with, I'm going to support the recommendation, go ahead on
Mhm.
this. And as far as elected officials running for the office, I think if we or the members of the assembly populate the charter review committee, it's going to lose credibility.
Right.
It's going to lose credibility with voters.
Right.
So,
It's just
and the voters, when they don't understand an issue or they think that something's being foisted on them, they tend to vote against it.
Mhm.
So I'm hoping that if we vote to form this committee, that it's going to have great credibility with the voters when it comes to the ballot.
Yeah, the other point that I want to make is that in the 1988 Barnstable County Charter Commission, back then, we did have to deal with transition.
Yeah.
Because the county was phasing out of an elected treasurer. So that charter was written and wrote into it specifically the finance director position. And there were provisions in the charter about the finance director.
Right.
And there was a transition language. So these elected bodies, when they come up with their recommendations, it's not unusual to have these transitional provisions. So that should the charter be adopted, there's a smooth transition from one form of governance to the other.
Was the treasurer on the ballot at the same time as the charter?
I'd have to check. I'm not sure, but I think it was pretty clear where the group was going, and it worked smoothly. Now, how the incumbent? I know the incumbent wasn't particularly thrilled with the idea of the position being converted, but nonetheless,
right.
That transition went very, very smoothly. So,
And I will say the same thing happened when the county advisory board, was being phased out in favor of the assembly. There was
Right.
provision made for how that transition would occur.
Right, let me just
Okay.
one of the I don't want to get too far down the road with specific recommendations, but one of the recommendations that comes up occasionally is to have 5 county commissions elected regionally instead of 3, which means that people who are on the ballot in 2026
Mm-hmm.
would serve 2 years and then the whole thing would transition. And one presumption would be, if that happened, that all the county commissioners would have to run in the election in 2028.
Well, there still has to be a rotation, because we have 2 years, 2 years.
They did this in Barnstable with the council, and I think all the council members pretty much.
That may be, but that's something to be talked about
Yeah.
in
You guys
18 months
did.
or a year.
and-
So
And I'll just say
they'll
to
figure
that,
out.
thank you, Madam
We do
Chair. I
this
think
all
it's-
the time with expansion of boards, for example, select boards from 3 to 5.
Mhm.
Maybe not necessarily elected regionally, but we do this all the time. So
Right.
there are ways to word it so that
Right.
you address all of the issues that you're raising.
Those can get all worked out at that end of it. Okay.
Well, I think from my point of view, one of the good things about this discussion is Michelle and her colleagues, have had enormous experience here in Massachusetts dealing with charter commissions and providing guidance and advice. So I think we're in very, very good hands
Now,
as we go through this.
are we looking at an ordinance or a resolution?
I think, Madam Chair, I would recommend, in the motion that I'd like to make, is that we
Yeah.
authorize the administrator to work with council to draft a resolution to begin this process.
Right.
So that we can vote on it, at our next meeting.
Right.
Is that a
Right.
motion?
That is my motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Done. We'll be
There you
in touch.
For now.
All right, well, I think I already wrote it this morning, so I'll send it over to
Very
you.
good.
Okay, good.
Very good. We
All
can
right.
post
Thanks,
that.
folks.
Thank you.
Take
so
care
much.
now.
Take it good.
Good to see you.
Michelle.
All right.
All right.
Caroline?
Yes.
Yes, you'd like to make a comment quickly if possible, then
I'm sorry.
There's someone who'd like to raise their hand.
Oh,
Maybe
oh.
Okay, Lynn Pleffner,
From the league.
yes, from the league and from Chatham.
Yes.
Yes, Lynn, we
Can we bring
welcome
it?
you, come in.
Lynn, you're muted.
You are muted.
Can we,
I think have we unmuted her on our side?
She's presented.
Okay,
There you
good
go.
morning, commissioners. I'm Lynn Pleffner. I'm president of the League of Women Voters of the Cape Cod area. I just
Mhm.
wanted to let you know that we are in favor of an independent charter review committee. And by the word independent, I mean literally independent with no affiliation, no offense, with the county commissioners or with the Assembly of Delegates. And I just wanted to let you know our position.
I thank you for that, Lynn, and I, as always, the league kind of leads the way with rational thinking. So thank you for that. We will keep you informed. Okay, and your hand is still raised. You can take that down, please, because I'll keep calling on you. Is there anyone else, Robin?
No, that's all.
Okay. All right, Lynn, thank you so much for that comment. All right, we're going to move on to item B, which is the presentation of the Barnstable County Facilities Master Plan scenarios. So we have several things to look at, it looks like. And I'm going to let everyone come up and introduce themselves and where they're from. Paul, you can come on up with your team here.
the middle show? Aren't you glad you weren't sitting at the table? We'd be asking you all sorts of questions.
So
If we could make Michael Schreier.
I think you did already. Beautiful. So I'll start off quickly. I'm Paul Rosala, Barnstable County Assets and Infrastructure Manager. And a year ago this time, we went out to RFP and we ended up selecting Gensler to help us strategically plan for facilities improvements and master planning. So we're here now to again present to you, and we can go through the group to do introductions.
Yes, please. We'll
Sure.
just start with you.
I'm Keller Outen, principal with Gensler.
I'm Erin Corcoran. I'm a strategy lead with Gensler.
And I'm Mike Schreier, a project architect with Gensler.
Okay.
All right, so we have some slides, but as we did last time, please feel free to ask us questions as we go through this. We would welcome a discussion around a lot of these topics.
Okay.
So we were here in May, and at that point we were presenting. We had just finished the first phase of our kind of analysis. And so what we have done since then is we've developed 5 different scenarios looking at different ways of accommodating the programmatic goals, the goals around the public interface and optimizing and being efficient with county real estate. And so then we've what we want to present today and get some feedback on is the selected scenario and then further development of that and what that would mean for the county over a long period of time, most likely. So Mike, if you want to go, but before we jump in, just wanted to acknowledge, as Paul said, this has been a decent length of time that we've been working on this process over the last roughly 8 months or 9 months. And a lot of people have been involved and really contributed significantly to help inform this, inform the county's needs. So I just want to recognize the working group: Michael Dutton, Paul Rosala, Vera Herrick, Carol Coppola, Don Reynolds, and Rick Finuccio. And then I won't name all the other people that we interviewed, but our team met with representatives of all of the different departments across the county that this work will impact, to make sure that we were, factoring in that input and feedback all along the way. Mm-hmm. So it's been a really good process, I think, where we feel like we've got a really good handle on what the needs are, what the vision is going forward. So. So quickly, the agenda for today, kind of a 4-part agenda. The first part is just a recap, a reminder, since that was several months ago that we were here last. So we'll just kind of summarize where we were at that point. Then we'll spend most of the time talking about 5 different scenarios that accommodate and address a lot of the needs that we uncovered in the first part of this. Then we'll spend some time talking about what we recommend as the kind of the scenario moving forward. There's a couple of different kind of versions within that we'll talk about. And then the last item is just, it is it's a significant financial, consideration about how to move this forward. So just some thoughts and, things for additional follow-up relative to that. All right. So as a recap of last time, when we met with you, phase one of this was 2 parts, looking at the master plan programming. So that was, we kicked it off with a vision session with the working group, identifying, what are the long-term goals for this. This, I think, important to note that this was really the first kind of comprehensive look across all of the county departments and real estate across all of the county. There had been several studies, in years previous, but they were more focused around a particular property or a particular group. So this was a great, opportunity to look more holistically and longer term. So that was the first part of it. And then accompanying that, we also did a very detailed facilities condition assessment. Our team, along with all of our consultant team, that included structural engineers and MEP engineers, civil engineer. We went through all of the county real estate and did a thorough assessment of the condition of each of the buildings. So that sets us up nicely for what we're here to talk about today, which is the phase 2, which is the master plan scenarios. And we won't, it was, again, a lot of work went into that, and we don't have time to go into too much detail, but we're going to try to summarize the pros and cons of the different scenarios that lead us to the recommended solution. All right, so next slide. And then as a recap of the drivers, certainly optimizing the use of the county space and real estate, recognizing that, the teams that are working together have been over a period of time, kind of distributed across different locations, and the space is used differently than maybe it was intended originally. So looking for ways to optimize and bring those groups together. Fiscally responsible facilities is certainly an important charge of this study, and figuring out how to have to utilize the real estate as efficiently as possible. Improving the community interface was another theme that we heard through a number of the conversations we had with various groups and constituents about just making the county administration more accessible to the community, and then creating an improved talent experience for the county staff and administrators and others that experience the county buildings, making that a really, improving on the experience from where it is today. A lot of, dated facilities and things that could be improved upon. Mm-hmm. All right. So then just 3 key takeaways from that first period of assessment. No surprise, the condition of the existing buildings is in fair or poor condition in a lot of cases. Certainly no fault of the current facilities team. Don and Paul and team are, have inherited a lot of kind of legacy challenges around deferred maintenance, code compliance, accessibility, all of those things that we talked about in the last meeting. A consolidated hub is another thing that rose through our discussions about, again, going to the point of optimizing the physical real estate and just making the best utilization of that. And that, in this case, means bringing groups together that had been separated and consolidating them at the county complex. And then another important finding is that the trial courts occupy a little more than half of the total real estate that is owned by the county, for which the county receives lower than market rate, rent, but has the burden of the upkeep and maintenance and operation of those facilities. That often, there's a process where that work often is done, and then you have to go back and seek reimbursement after the fact. So not a bit of a challenging circumstance around the trial courts. All right, so I'll pass it to Aaron to talk us through the master plan scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Before we go, can we just have a brief additional information on when we talk about below market rents? Do we have a number on that at all?
Like what we get and what.
It's a bit of a difficult thing to quantify candidly, because there aren't a lot of, examples of rents for the types of spaces that
that are,
Right.
you know, we have at the end, and when we get to that section, we have a spreadsheet that looks at the different types of properties, you know, courthouses, large, you know, and the dollars per square foot. I think there's still some work that we need to, you know, go through to identify what the current rents
But
are.
you can help us get that information.
Yeah, and
in a final report.
We could do that, yes.
Yeah.
And we can look at just
Yeah, it's
office
very, as
space.
you know, we don't have a lot of revenue sources.
Right.
To run the county government, and I think,
Mhm.
the more information we have documenting.
We can make the case.
Yeah.
Right, understood.
Just to give it, obviously, we're not alone in that situation.
No.
Mark and I and Sheila attended a Massachusetts County Commissioners luncheon. And one of the big topics was state reimbursement and the courthouses and the maintenance of the property.
Mhm.
So there's an ongoing effort to try to ramp up that remuneration. We'll see where it gets them.
Yeah.
But there it is.
Okay. Excellent. We'll follow up with that.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Okay.
Scenarios.
So let's get into it. We've been tasked with sharing the 4 scenarios that we explored, as well as the refined scenario that brings in pieces from those. This is a bit of a recap from what we showed at the last meeting. One of the key pieces for that were distributed across multiple sites, multiple buildings. In talking to all of the departments, this is our proposed ideal adjacencies for the teams. It does centralize a lot of the teams within the county complex, both for administrative departments and public facing, so that you can have that one public interface. But also, as Keller mentioned, this is a comprehensive master plan, so there are some other sites in play. County dredge and fire training have a lot of overlaps in the type of program they provide, so we are proposing to locate them together for some efficiencies between their warehouses and sort of how their business runs. Joint Base Cape Cod is working well and has an adjacency to their sewer connections that they need to maintain. Children's Cove within their existing location, you'll see it within the scenarios, but proposing to leave them in place. And then the county farm, looking at which teams go there. And then Cape Cod Commission within our scenarios remains in their leasehold, but you'll see on some of the pages a toggle as far as what would be the implications of bringing them within the county complex as well. So we looked at initially 4, technically 5 scenarios, playing around with some of the variables so that we could explore, if you ran out this decision all the way to the end, what would be the implications? The optimized scenarios where we sort of bring together the thinking within these. So the 5 that we're going to do an overview today, scenario 1 is looking at that consolidation on county complex within the old jail building, but with an addition to the jail. We'll show what that looks like. Within all of the non-county complex locations, which I'll also speak to, there's some renovations and additions at those sites. But you can see for 1, 2A, 2B, and scenario 3, the proposal for the alternate sites is the same, and then we're moving the levers around at county complex. 2A is a new build, so no longer within the jail, a new building containing the lab. 2B is a new build with the lab remaining in place. So looking at those variables, the benefits and costs for that. We also took a look at Finney's Lane. This is a property that was available and has been in conversation for a new county building. So we look at that as one potential. And then scenario 4 is really the what if we limited new build or addition, what would be the implications of more of a stay in place study across the portfolio? And I'll go through each of these individually, but that's the variables that we're really looking at is jail, new builds, Finney's Lane, stay in place, sort of,
Right.
and what are the implications of all of those
And the
choices?
costs, I can see you have sort of like that.
Yeah, we will give actual costs.
Yeah, how much your meal is gonna be. Okay.
Yeah. Buckle in. Next one. So looking at scenario 1. So scenario 1, you can see we've got our sketch up here of these existing jail building and a addition across the back. We took a look at the south wing as far as could this be converted into usable space. In the scenarios that we explored, we're really excluding that. We think it'll be a lot of work to get it to basic levels. So from a cost perspective, you'll see in the scenarios, we're not including the currently dormant south wing within the scenarios. What you see in the jail opportunity, this does meet our goals for bringing all of the teams together into a single site. Water quality would remain in its existing building. And then within the wider master plan, I'll show on the next page, the other teams are needed, our needs are met. For the cons, the old jail is an existing older building. So while we can look at it and see how much square footage is available, in the process of renovating, you're inevitably going to find other issues with the building. Our costs do include the code upgrades required and bringing everything up. It's also from a workplace design perspective, it's a pretty inefficient floor plan. It's very long, and even with the addition behind and the space available, you could configure it for workplace, but to really meet those department needs, we are seeing this as a little weaker than some of the other scenarios. And then with its position at the very back of County Complex, there's also some potential public parking or access issues that would lead to it being a little bit less than ideal than some of the other options. Mm-hmm. And then if you're looking at these later, I'm just going to talk through the pros and cons, but it'll show sort of rough square footages, which teams are at which site as you're going through them. So what happens at the other sites within this, and as mentioned, this carries through the majority of the scenarios. We're bringing fire and dredge together. It says location TBD. We looked a little bit at the existing fire training site, but they have a similar program where they're coming in, doing a team stand-up, going through their vehicles and heading out to other locations. Both teams need a maintenance bay. Both teams need an area to do their team setup and potentially a shared admin that could sort of do traffic control for them. So we do think that they're beneficial together, and the blocking diagram that you're seeing, it has the outline of the existing fire training hub underneath, and then this would be proposing a little bit of an addition as the site to meet both of those teams. County Farm, in these scenarios we're looking at, we do recognize that there is a desire to have a public-facing meeting space on that site and bringing the nutrition program to the farm versus having it off-site within these scenarios. Children's Cove, we took a look at their study they had completed in the last year, optimized the program a bit. We think there's some efficiencies there. They had a large public meeting room in their desired program, but in the wider view of the master plan, we're providing some really great meeting spaces on County Complex. So we tightened up their program, but we still feel that their existing site is a little short on square footage to meet their future needs. And Joint Base Cape Cod, they are, I think they've recently completed their new lab building. Their needs are very well met with that new facility, so they're remaining the same in the master plan. So getting into some of the other variables, I'm going fairly quickly. Feel free to stop me at any time, but just to get us to the optimized one, the headline. So 2A, 2B, it was do we rebuild the lab in a brand new facility? Do we keep it where it is? Is the only variable that's shifting between these two, but it is a new build in both scenarios. So this allows us to bring all the teams together on one of our primary goals with a footprint within the building that is more suitable to workplace. The off-site program needs fully captured. It's the same across these 4 scenarios. The cons around the water quality lab variable is rebuilding lab space it's more expensive than workplace. So does it make sense to rebuild that when they're remaining there? And we'll speak a little bit more about scenario 2B, but we do feel in our optimized scenario, the lab is probably best suited in their existing facility, but pulling the SHINE program out so that they would have the full building. Finney's Lane is a new build, predominantly focusing on the County Complex program. So Finney's Lane has a number of zoning items. That's what we're showing in the colors, either setbacks from the highway needed parking to be provided at the site for the building. So really the gray box, and feel free to jump in if I get any of this incorrect, the gray box is really the buildable area that could be a workplace site once you accommodate all of those setbacks and the expected parking. So while this achieves some of the goals for bringing all the programs together and having a one front door for the public to access those teams, in a suitable two-story rectangle that would be suitable for workspace, it does have some disadvantages related to parking, adjacencies to any groups that are now on a different site, as well as sort of advertising and creating a new public hub in a location that is less familiar for Barnstable County community. There's also, you'll see this sort of caution sign in the corner as far as how we had to tweak the ideal program to fit into that footprint. We are reducing some of the spaces within the footprint. There's only room for one public meeting space versus two that we feel is required, reducing storage, and really making sure that that's an efficient purpose-built building. It's not a lot of square footage to work with.
Yeah, so the only thing I'll add is that just given the constraints of the site and looking at some of the zoning regulations, it's a smaller building than you could potentially achieve on the county complex to meet the same programmatic needs. And so there were some adjustments to the program accordingly. And I think that's just to make a comparison, right, between the two options.
Mm-hmm. But it was an option that merited exploring. It's
Right.
still it's still a good site, and it would be a good workplace experience in a brand new build, but there are some disadvantages if we're looking at the overall goals. Okay, and then scenario 4, before we get into the optimized one where we're combining some of these. So scenario 4 is really that, what if we didn't build any new buildings? What if there were no additions? What would be the implications for our long-term planning across the portfolio that we have? So you'll see a few pages. This first one is really looking at the jail. We are still excluding the South Wing, but within this, to fit programs within, we tried to take a look at who are the public-facing groups and could we try to co-locate them within the jail so that you've got that front door for nursing or Shine or anything that people are coming in for, and then use some of the other buildings for more of the back of house administrative. So what you're seeing in this is a little bit of workplace in that light blue where currently one of the public meeting rooms is. This also kicks us down to one public meeting space. And maintaining emergency preparedness on that site. But as you can see with the bubble diagram, there just isn't, and I think we know this, there's not a lot of available square footage within that shape for the jail.
Right.
This scenario would also have us maintaining some footprints in the other buildings just due to the space available without a new build. On the left, we've got Superior Courthouse where we are today, maintaining meeting space, adding some additional workspace. Our program is accommodating growth from the team as well, so that's why it's looking bigger than what we have today. And then the other space that would be available potentially in play is the lower level of deeds and probate. Currently, there's a few team members sitting in that area, a little bit more storage, but this could be converted into workspace for a few of more of those administrative programs within, though it does have those less than ideal access to daylight, a little bit tricky within the existing building.
Mm-hmm.
And then within scenario 4, this is also if there's no new builds across the master plan, what are also the implications of this? So we would still propose to bring fire and dredge together, but it would be within the existing footprint of the fire training. You would still have a bay for repairs, but it's already pretty small for fire training alone. If you bring dredge in there as well, it would be pretty tight. County Farm, that public-facing program would go away in this scenario, but could still be served on County Complex potentially. And then Children's Cove would remain within the existing footprint. We did explore, like maybe there's some optimization within those floors to do perhaps shared desking on the upper level for the people working within the building. So the public-facing elements are on the main floor. They currently have some accessibility issues and tweaking that as needed, but it is, as noted, a pretty tight fit.
So yeah, so looking at all 5, really 4.5 scenarios, we ran through narratives with a cost estimating team, cost estimating consultant to run the comparison between them and kind of understand financially where things would fall out. So One common line that you see for the first 4 scenarios here is that the other site estimated construction cost is pretty similar, because in order to achieve the program, we're looking at similar investment in all those different facilities to bring them up to meet the programmatic needs that we identified through the scenario process. And then the top line that you'll see on all the scenarios is a comparison of what would it be to take the old jail, renovate it, add an addition, bring it up to accessibility standards, things like that, compared to new construction, whether with a lab or without. You can see there's a pretty big upcharge to bring the lab to that building. And then when we looked at the Finney's Lane scenario, obviously the cost was a lot lighter, but you're getting a much smaller building, maybe 2/3 of the amount of usable square footage for meeting the programmatic needs. And then the scenario 4, the numbers are, of course, different because we're trying to make renovations within those existing footprints. So all this cost estimating was done at a pretty conceptual level, but taking advantage of the conditions assessments that we had done, particularly on the old jail, but also some of the other buildings, to understand how that investment would work out in those buildings. And then, we added to that construction costs at the other sites, the deferred maintenance that we reviewed with you all last time, that would be for some of the spaces that are tenant spaces to the courts and things like that. And then that gave us our total estimated construction cost. That's that ECC line that you see second from the bottom. That's to kind of do everything all at once. And then added to that is a total project cost kind of upscaling factor, and that would account for things that are not part of a construction budget. So whether that's design fees, hazardous materials testing, logistics, temporary facilities, we often see that is additional soft costs that come on top of the actual construction cost. So, the numbers get really high really quickly, but that's given the breadth of work. And so I think one of the takeaways from all of this was to look at the different scenarios and then understand how they might impact optimizing them as we move forward. So, and again, it's at a conceptual level. I think as you dive into the details, there may be economies of scale or improvements that could be made, but at this conceptual level, that's where we arrived to.
Now, to put a caveat on all of those numbers, I think if you want to go to the next one. So this was at the end of the scenarios level. So looking at the pros and cons that we reviewed, how are we serving those future goals? How are we bringing the teams together? But also understanding that some of the more beneficial scenarios are expensive. How can we tighten those programs and look at ways that we could bring it a little bit closer to reality? So what you're seeing on here is we really took a harder look at scenario 2B. So this is the new build on County Complex without the lab, because that meets all of your needs. It maintains the legacy location within County Complex. It has some opportunities to have that community facing front, but it's also on the prior page, one of the pricier scenarios. So how could we take a look at that one, understanding that it's the most beneficial for the future, but really being one of those drivers that Keller mentioned, being efficient with the money that we're looking at. So looking at ways to further optimize and generate revenue. I won't go through all of the cons. We kind of reviewed them on the prior slides, but for the optimized scenarios, we made some pretty significant tweaks to 2B to kind of bring it back down to ground. So what you'll see on the next page is where we started with refining that new build on County Complex. So our initial program was at about 50,000 usable square feet. So that's before walls and gross up factor. But the program that we start with, and when we do master planning exercises, we always start with the ideal program, which in the case of the current county workforce includes a lot of office allocations, either at the deputy, assistant deputy level, that perhaps in a 20-year workspace might not be needed, especially when people are working from home more often. So we maintained at the senior leadership level office allocations, but we took a look at that next tier down because we can save a lot of space and cost by going to workstations. So that bought us about 4,200 square feet just by shifting the office allocations. The next one down that we take a look at, we're working with a lot of businesses right now that have a hybrid work schedule post-pandemic where employees are at home 3 days a week, they're coming in 2 days a week. This is what we heard from the majority of the departments. It's a benefit for talent attraction. People are enjoying that work mode. But do you need a full large cubicle when you're only coming in for part of the week? So something that we recommend, leverage seating. So it is a shared seating model. You usually have we'll call it group address, and you might have an area for your department, so you know where to find people when you do come in. But we take a look at utilization, different work schedules to determine how many seats per person. We don't do a straight like 3 people per 1 seat. I think we used a factor along 1.2, 1.5 employees. So when you have a peak day, there's spaces available. And in best practice workplace design, you'll have alternate seating. You'll have a cafe, you'll have a little coffee area that you can use if it's a really full day, like for a town hall or like a summer celebration. So we were able to, by going to a shared workspace model, the offices are still assigned in this scenario, but we do recommend changing the hardware a bit. So it could be a meeting room with locked cabinets when that leader is out, so people could use that space. So reducing the leverage seating, yeah, the yellow on that board, thank you, got us another 9,100 square feet down from that overall. And then we looked at one more tweak, which is registry of deeds. So our ideal program was co-locating all county departments on county complex, but we know registry of deeds is a unique program. They have a space that's working well for them that was renovated recently. And if we were to remain on campus, it wouldn't be a huge reach to keep them in place at deeds and probate. So that brought us another 17,000 square feet because they do have a large storage and archiving need. So for the optimized scenario, the program we're moving forward with is the 32,000 USF building, which is much reduced from the larger build that we were looking at before, and we'll show what that looks like in the site plan. The last little bar there is what if Cape Cod Commission came into the building, if we wanted to share the workspace with that group. Their program is relatively small. It's an additional 5,300 square feet. We proceeded with the 32, but just for your reference, if we wanted to bring them in to share that workspace as well as have them as a tenant, it would just go up by that bit.
And should we pause there for any, I know there's a lot of information, any questions on the scenarios?
The one question, I have 2 questions. So we would remain, the administration would remain where it is in this Superior Courthouse.
In the optimized scenario, you would be part of the new build.
Of the new,
Yeah.
This one here.
Yeah, only scenario 4 has you remaining in this exact area.
So that would also expand the space the courts would be using, which would increase the square footage and their
And the
rent.
revenues, yes,
Potentially,
correct.
yes.
And if the Cape Cod Commission came in, they pay an extraordinary amount of money in rent.
Mhm.
So that for so many years could be transferred
To your
to
building.
the cost.
Mhm.
You know, we could continue charging, maybe a little reduced or whatever,
Yeah.
you know, might help the
As a
public,
potential
you know,
revenue.
Public service.
Yeah.
But that could be transferred for a certain amount of years. We could determine that, whatever.
Correct.
So, okay, that's all I have. Anybody else?
And then we do have, we're going to show you a site plan of this option versus
Mhm.
just the numbers as
Right.
well.
Okay.
But any other questions just before we dive into
Yeah,
that?
just, I mean, presuming we do not use the old jail.
In the optimized scenario, that's correct.
We're still
Yeah.
gonna have it. You know,
Mhm.
It's still gonna be sitting there.
Mhm.
Right.
Ultimately, the disposition of that property is gonna have to be a part of the decision here. Because, I mean, I imagine it could sit there for another 100 years.
Yep.
Essentially, the cost of demolishing it or dealing with it's gonna have to also be considered in the
Be
package
huge.
of changing the thing. And the other thing is that I know it's impossible to determine the future, given what's going on in Washington and stuff, but there would be a cost reduction in the energy efficiency of these buildings, one would assume, including photoelectric panels and so on, and increased insulation and stuff, so.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity with the new build to create a really efficient building that can
Mhm.
carry you forward for
Right.
another 50
Which
years.
would
Yeah.
be a very good statement, since that's what we promote
Mhm.
throughout the land, as they say. So,
Mhm.
And the other thing that I see when I look at this is that, you know, a lot of the counties in Massachusetts have been abolished.
Mm.
But we sort of have a grounding here. I mean, we're Cape Cod. We
Mhm.
also have a campus, which was given to us, I think, back in 1685, when
Mm.
Lucky Monks in
Mhm.
Boston.
Yeah.
So it's part of our identity
Right.
as a county that we're
Mhm.
here,
Yeah.
I
as
agree.
opposed to going off
I think it's
somewhere
important
else.
we are here.
That was an
the
important,
county seat, yeah.
right, important consideration. Even in looking at the Finney's Lane property, it did feel like just from an identity standpoint and the
Right.
kind of the history of this site, it did diminish that a little bit. So
I
I would say that factored into the.
I think it's important. Okay,
And regarding the old jail question, if pin that for a moment, because we definitely have some thoughts on the site plan we'd like to show.
okay.
So at long last, preamble complete, the optimized scenario. So within the optimized scenario, the sites in play remain the Fire Training Academy, Children's Cove, Mastec, out on the base, Barnstable County Farm, and the county complex. The goals are similar to what we've been talking about as we go through, consolidating the teams, that public interface. I think something that especially when we were looking at county complex, that we think could be elevated as well as the beneficial community spaces. If we're going to remain within the town of Barnstable, how can we make this site more accessible from green space? We're also, the one program that shifts around in the optimized is the public meeting space and nutrition program. In the scenarios was located at the farm, but we do feel if we're going to build a new building at County Complex, that could be a really interesting program to bring into town of Barnstable with a test kitchen, public areas, event. It could cross over as event space and also have more of a community hub within the building. So just calling that one out because that's a little different from the prior ones. It also reduces the build out at the farm. Hybrid workplace that we talked about with that shared seating, reduced office hierarchy, and then enhancing the offsite facilities, ensuring that Dredge, which is a program that really needs a home, is accommodated within the master plan, expanding the support at Children's Cove and Mastec. We had shown you a version of this diagram in the last meeting, but if you're looking for a key of which departments, where they are now, where they're going in this scenario, the only tweak between the version that we showed a couple months ago is really that nutrition program to Barnstable. The rest remains the same. Okay, next one.
And do we want to note the Cape Cod Commission? They have 8,000 square feet right now, but if they were to join the consolidated building, they could take advantage of things like meeting spaces. And so there's, you saw on the other slide that it was like plus 5,000 square feet. So
Right.
there's some efficiencies there too.
Yeah. Okay. And then the offsite, I think I hit this on the prior side, but Fire and Dredge still looking to do a little bit of expansion on that site. County Farm now is just the Master Gardener program, the marine program that's currently working out there. Children's Cove is the same as the prior scenarios with a little bit of extra space, but not the large meeting space that we're looking for. And Mastec we've talked about. And then we're going to, next couple slides are purely focused on county complex. I think one thing to hit, this is a blocking diagram, but we will show you sort of where this building might be. But we are seeing with that optimized, that 32,000 program that we had earlier, that a 2-story building is about what we're looking at.
Yeah, so let's talk about the new building and what the advantages of that would be. And there are a few. There's certainly the energy efficiency and just the ongoing operations and maintenance costs for a new efficient building are lower than maintaining an older building and all the work that would have to go into that. From just the size of the floor plate, and this goes to the old jail. We did look at a scenario where you would repurpose that and improve that, but from a kind of a best practices workplace planning standpoint, the narrowness of that floor plate and the way that it's configured, where you have to come all the way back to the middle to then branch out again, it's just hard to allow for the flexibility that we would anticipate you needing over the next 40, 50, 60 years on the site. So there's some real advantages in a larger floor plate and the ability to have that flexibility over time.
Can I just jump in here? Do people actually communicate in person anymore?
Believe it or not, they do.
Where you are, right? At the other end of the building,
It's a good question. Fair point. I think that we have found the most engaging workplaces when people do choose to come in. If you want to promote that people come in, for one thing, you have to provide that environment. And if it's not that environment, then yeah, it's easier to just sit at your desk or in your cubicle and be on a phone call all day long. So I think there are some real advantages about centralizing amenities and conference spaces and cafe and the things that make for a more engaging, vibrant workplace.
Yeah, I mean, I I think that what was heard and what I even expressed is, bringing people together, you get a synergy and even between departments.
Right.
What you're working on and how can we do that even better? if
Exactly.
we shared this, so
Just
it doesn't always happen when you're texting or emailing.
I want to jump in here because there is a contrary view that if you're open to everybody else, then you actually do end up getting less work done. In other words, you
Right.
stop by with a cup of coffee and you talk, hey, what's going on and stuff like that. But some people enjoy being more isolated and less,
Yeah.
They can stay at home.
But it's a great point. I think variety and choice is essential.
Yes.
So certain job functions require a lot more heads down focus work or confidential conversations. Those people should be in offices, for people that have other roles that maybe require more collaboration, an environment kind of like that would be more beneficial for them. So we're not proposing that this is an open floor plate for the entirety of there's still, as Erin said, there are elements of this program that will be enclosed and have focus space and heads down kind of space within it.
Right, and there's flexibility built into it. How you
Absolutely.
do that.
Yeah, and there's something really interesting that came out as we were sort of blocking out this 2-story building that you could really, what you're seeing in that lower one, which is that ground floor, have a much more welcoming sort of front door to the town of Barnstable, to people coming from across the county, where you'd co-locate like a central cafe and that nutrition program, the meeting spaces all near that front door. Have some storage and the emergency preparedness towards the back there. But then upstairs, that would really be more for the county employees. So to the distractibility, the ground floor would be a bit more active, but upstairs you could sort of zone it out. So you've got those quieter areas as well. But the opportunity to have all of the teams in one place for the first time in a long time, I think to your point, will cause potentially some unexpected synergies between departments that maybe haven't directly collaborated in the past.
Right.
It's a good segue to the next slide, which is where we would propose to locate it on the site. One approach would be you could demolish the existing old jail and build a new building up at the top of the hill, which was what our original scenario 2B looked at that location. However, in thinking about a couple of things, we decided that might not actually be the best approach. One is just the challenges of the topography, and it is not as accessible. I mean, you can certainly make it accessible and compliant, but the parking lot, for probably the majority of people coming, is always going to be down the hill. So you have to negotiate that slope. The other driver is that if you were to rethink portions of the site, and we'll get into some planning diagrams on this topic, that could be a better location for other uses potentially, and have the county complex building be closer to the parking for that, accessibility function, and to relate it more to the other county functions on the site. So, but before we get to that, parking, the existing, we looked at, lots of different ways of optimizing the county complex real estate. And one thing that jumped out at us is parking is a challenge. I mean, every time we've been here, it's hard to find a spot, certainly, on peak days. We feel like through some regrading of the existing lot, tightening up of the medians between, you could add an additional double-sided drive aisle, which would allow you to pick up an additional 70 spaces within the bounds of the existing footprint of the central parking lot. So that was, a relatively simple thing, but something that, that would help address the parking challenges currently. So then the next looks at one location. We have two different locations we're going to show you for the potential location of the new county administration building. This was one, which is simply pulling down the hill from the old jail so that it would be roughly at the same elevation as the parking lot, so that you'd be able to just seamlessly kind of walk into the building, to the points Erin was making about that experience of, a kind of a welcoming front door for the public and the staff that will be working here. So maybe let's go to the site section, or actually, yeah, just to explain that, the site section, Mike. So this is on the right side of the screen, this is a section, you can see the the plan on the lower right corner with the white arrow. This is showing kind of roughly where we're cutting this section through. So the old jail up at the top of the hill on the far right side, we've slid the new building down to be roughly, you know, level with the new parking, or with the parking lot. So in a 2-story building, in keeping with the scale of the complex, you know, we didn't want to overwhelm the height of the existing site. And that actually works quite well with these are roughly 20,000 square foot floor plates, 2 of those stacked, and that's a great size for a kind of a modern office building. All right, and sorry, if we go now back. So then the other important question is what are, and I think we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting, is what are some other potential revenue sources to help enable this work? And one of those, and there's probably, you know, a couple of different ways you could look at this, but the development of multifamily housing is one potential. So the sites that we have identified here in yellow, you can see one of those is the old jail site up at the top of the hill. And that could either be an approach where you would demolish it and build new, or we did talk about a potential, you know, that narrow floor plate that is not so convenient for an office planning layout actually works pretty well for housing, because you want the daylight, and the narrowness of that floor plate actually could be potentially interesting as a redevelopment of that site. Now there's the cost, you'd have to do, you know, a pretty good cost benefit analysis of that versus building new. And the other aspect is just this would require the involvement of a private developer, and they will have certain, you know, requirements to make the financial aspects of this work. So that's, you know, further exploration.
Yeah, it'd be housing, but not necessarily the people. It would be more market rate.
Right.
Yeah, just, you know, when I pictured this and I pictured the old jail, you talk about housing, my mind goes to the mill buildings in Massachusetts. It's quite nice housing.
Right.
And spacious with a lot of light, natural light from the old big windows and stuff. So that's how realistic it is, I don't know, but it sounds like an option, definitely an option.
Right. So this looks at, you know, there's a few different potential places that you could, you know, create housing on the site. We did think that, you know, there's something kind of interesting about being up at the top of the hill. It would feel a little bit separated, which is what you want. You know, you want some separation between the different uses. If the complex is more at the lower part of the hill, closer to Main Street, more accessible to the public, the housing sitting up at the top of the hill might be kind of an interesting way to separate it. And then the other, so that's the 2 up at the kind of the top left and the top. And then we're saying potential mixed use development closer, you know, to Main Street. Backing up to some of those kind of businesses could be developed as more of a mixed use potentially. They could incorporate housing, could incorporate office space, could incorporate even, you know, additional retail and restaurants, just as another option. And then we're showing in the middle zone a potential 1-story parking deck, because depending on how much additional development there is, that will drive the requirement for additional parking space. And at a certain point, you would exceed the amount that you could get with the existing surface lot. So there could be an option to develop a 1-story parking structure to increase the parking if that became a need. So that's the first option that we looked at, and we thought, you know, that there's definitely some nice things that are working with this. But I think as we thought about it more, if this is really an opportunity to rethink, you know, this is the long-term view of this, what other opportunities might there be to unlock public amenities on the site and other things for the public, and thinking more about how to structure it so that the identity that I think we like about this complex is strengthened even more than it already is. So then we looked at option B, which says, rather than locate the building on the top of the parking lot, what if we were to think about orienting it, rotating it 90 degrees and grouping it so that it had more of a relationship to the courthouse and deeds and probate, and almost create this kind of like a little park public area in the middle and give it a sense of place. And then that would even have, a future site available on the north side of this kind of quad idea could be the lab in the future if the top of the hill site, if it was more attractive to a developer partner to rebuild the lab down the hill, that could be kind of an interesting idea to create a more kind of concentrated identity for the county complex. We would work I think you could reduce the amount of vehicular traffic and parking around the current kind of island out there by routing it, as you come off Main Street, take that first left and then get into a parking structure, which you would likely need in this scenario because you're displacing some of the existing parking by locating the building in that location. But that would, I think, in a way, that would be nice because then you could take some of the traffic and parking out of that zone and create a nice public square environment. And then the other thing we're suggesting in this version is now the hillside, because you don't have the building kind of tucked into the hill, that hill could be redeveloped as like an open air kind of amphitheater environment or a park setting. I think there could be some nice ways that you could do some terraced seating areas, which is what we're showing on the hill. And then this also just creates this nice, we feel like, zone of potential future other development, whether it's housing or some other use that could have almost, like a separate entry off of Main Street, separate from the county, that's on the left side, that yellow arrow, whereas the entry more to serve the county complex could be on the right side where the two blue arrows are shown. And then this is a section cut the opposite way of the one that we looked at before that shows the courthouse on the far right side, that idea of that public park kind of quad idea in the middle next to the new county complex building, and then a parking structure just to the left of that.
So just to follow up on what we mentioned about potential development, we did a little bit of research. We're not, we're just thinking about future considerations for the county. So there's been a number of studies, going back as far, maybe for a long time, even before that, but at least in the past 15 years, we've identified a few different studies that have identified the need for housing across Barnstable, the town of Barnstable, and also across the county. You see some factors like 2% of the land across the county is zoned for multifamily housing. So it's primarily zoned for single family housing. But the other piece that we took away from part of the regional strategy here is that within the town of Barnstable, there's a few areas of community activity, and the county complex being one, with the village, Main Street, but then also the complex right behind it. And so that's identified, has been identified through a number of studies. And so, part of our support here for that is that it has been studied for a while. There's a demonstrated need, and this is an opportunity to potentially address a need for the community throughout, whether it's through public givebacks in open spaces or through addressing the housing need, or a variety of those things. And so, again, this is just a kind of high level dive into some of the other.
This would involve a lot of other players.
Exactly.
And
yeah, and so
the community here,
correct.
Their input is going to be very strong associations here. Who want to keep the character, and I agree. We don't want to lose the historic value of this area. Also, the one thing that we haven't talked about is the sheriff's property.
Right.
Correct. Yeah. So we avoided those two areas. You can see that those are kind of carved out.
Yeah.
We did look. Maybe that's where you're going, Keller.
Conversation with the sheriff.
We have not had direct conversations with the sheriff. We intentionally kind of respected it for the purpose of this planning study. However, I think, because this will require, getting the interest of the private development community, it may be more attractive to have a larger contiguous plot of land that they could develop. And if that became the direction, I think at that point it would be smart to talk with the sheriff's office and negotiate, maybe there's a relocation strategy or some ways of accommodating that so that you can make that potential housing site as attractive as it could possibly be.
Right.
Let me just jump in for a minute. If this were a private property and we were looking at it for development, it would have to go through the planning board and the CPA and the Cape Cod Commission. And the first thing they would talk about is traffic. That's right on the top of the list. Both of the entrances to this complex empty onto Barnstable Village, which is quite a concentrated area and stuff like that. So if there were alternatives to that, that would be nice. I don't know if there are, but that would have to be an issue, especially if you put in housing with more and more traffic.
Right.
Believe me, I hear this all the time. You can't build that because
No, I'll
too
tell
many
you,
cars.
Right.
pulling in this morning, man, in the summertime, there's visitors here and I'm thinking to myself, it's pretty crowded. It was, half of my delay was just from the light to here because of bicycles and traffic and people trying to get in, a truck trying to pull back into the market. I'm trying to get over here and everything was at a standstill. So it's a challenge. And we do have to respect that this is a residential area as well. So there's going to be a lot of voices there. And I want that to be respected. So, okay.
Yeah, I think the next step, if you would need a traffic study, you would need a civil engineer to definitely do a capacity analysis and, traffic flows and understand what that would mean in terms of how you might enter and exit the site and impact to Main Street. That would definitely be something you would need to explore further if this went down that road.
Also site utilities, what it could support as far as water.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we have to be conscious of this, especially in the middle of a severe drought. We have to be conscious of our resources.
And the key term I would say is we talked back and forth, the potential, we call it potential development, potential housing. We talked when we started this whole master plan, we would look at every possible option, at least explore it. If it gets dismissed, it gets dismissed. But we felt if we just completely ignored, these areas for reuse or development, we'd be missing part of the master plan. We want to have that included with the study.
So would you do a ground lease? I mean, hey, this is public property now, and so you have a developer come on and build housing and will permanently give away the rights to the property. It would be a ground lease. And I know I'm not a lawyer, so I'm sure there's a way of doing these things, but it'd have to be, written out exactly right. So.
Yes.
Yes.
Those areas are our.
That's within county owned property. So yes, it would likely be a ground lease with the developer. So there would be, you'd negotiate the terms of that ground lease, but then also likely, a monthly revenue generation as part of the lease on the site. So, yeah.
Madam Chair.
Yes. Go right ahead.
Normally when public land is acquired, there's usually a very public process. Now, I don't know what the history is in terms of the ownership and the control of the site. But I'd be very interested in knowing whether or not there are any encumbrances on any of our property, because if much of this or some of it was acquired through some kind of public taking, there may be restrictions, legal aspects to all of this that may tie our hands a little bit in terms of what our options are. So have we had a chance to sort of delve into the legal aspects of this and whether or not we're constrained in any way?
Want me to take that one?
Yeah.
We do have some title work going on right now, just for exactly that reason, to figure out what we have, what the constraints are, what the easements are, if there are any reversionary interests. And so that's ongoing right now.
Yeah, because I think that's from my point of view, I think whatever comes out of that is going to have a significant potential on where any of it's goes. Like I said, I'm very familiar with in other areas where when public lands are taken, it's often for public purposes only. And then if those public purposes are no longer utilized, then sometimes something else happens. So that's what concerns me about all of this. This is all very interesting conversation, but until, from my point of view, where the title work, getting that done, I think will have a huge impact in terms of how creative we might be able to be. I will say you've done an incredible job here. I mean, it's a dizzying array of options. As we're going through this, what I'm trying to think about is how do we And as the chair has mentioned, we have this very vibrant group of stakeholders and groups that are interested in what's going on. So it's almost like, how do you whittle down this into like 3 or 4 options that can be presented and easily digested for engaging in some public discussion? Because clearly the folks in Barnstable Village, they're not going to be silent. They want to have a say, and we want to be able to have a conversation with them in examining the options. So from my point of view, in terms of next steps, to me, the legal questions are huge.
Yeah.
The other questions relate to how much revenue, the bottom line is that if we can figure out a way to make a development work so that we can meet our needs and generate a revenue stream that helps keep the county afloat. People have heard me talk about our financial challenges in the years ahead. What we want to do is come out of this, on the plus side, not further on the negative side. So there's going to have to be some financial analysis. And then the other thing would be, is there a way to whittle this down so that there's, like I said, there's a lot of material here. Now, you folks have been living with this, but for the uninitiated, I'm looking at it and my head's exploding. And it's like,
walk around and look at this with these in my hand.
Exactly.
And start looking at what is that possibility.
Yeah, and sometimes they're like, I don't want to say there are too many options, but there's a.
Well, they zeroed in on what they know. They explored all
I think we wanted to. We decided to err on the side of bringing you into the process.
Yeah,
you felt like you.
No, I appreciate that.
And see how we studied it, but I think if we were to present this to a broader kind of public in a public venue, we would certainly distill it down. We would cut to the chase.
Yeah, my problem it would be is how do we explain this in a very easy to digest, understandable way so that the public has 3 options or at least a few options to look at. The problem is that anytime you do a complex project like this, at least I found from my own experience in doing larger developments, is that the more pieces to it, the more opportunities there are to basically, criticize or raise objections to it. The more creative you are, sometimes the more objections can unfold.
Right,
so,
because it's an unknown.
Yeah, but let me just jump in for a minute. It's a little difference here because if a town were to do this, they would have to go bond it and so on. They'd have to go to town meetings. So they have to convince the public buy into it. Unfortunately, the way the county commission, they don't have to ask the public to buy into it. It's up to us, really. And we present it to the various regulatory boards, historical commissions, and so on. So we make a decision and the money gets appropriated by us and by the assembly. So it's really a bigger responsibility because, we can hear the voices and we always do, but ultimately it's our decisions. And by the way, if we go back to the deeds to find out restrictions, you're going to find out things like no cows on the property. It goes way back. Who knows?
I guess that kills the cow idea.
Tie your horses up over here. But, no, I to tell you the truth, I came into this discussion leaning toward renovating the old jail because I'm sort of a historic renovator type guy anyway. But this idea of a standalone building is very tempting because, as we all know, oftentimes building new is cheaper than renovating. And it would leave us on the county complex with the buildings adjacent and so on. So it's parking is an issue, but you seem to think that we could still have there's opportunities for additional parking to compensate for what we eliminate by the building. And also, one other aside, I keep bringing it back to 1685. Seems like a long time ago, but in what 2035, it'll be the 350th anniversary of Barnstable County's establishment. So that would be a nice target to try to accomplish this.
Oh,
yeah.
That's.
That's what 9 years.
My concern, my goal. I don't know if it would generate any additional income. I would like it that we did this and there was some sort of generation that took care of the bill, the mortgage. That's what I would say. We don't have that addition on everything else we have. That to me would be a huge success. And I'm throwing this out there because I watched this movie last night. It was on housing, and it was the Coops. You know about the Coops in New York, the cooperative. buildings.
Yes, but I don't think I've seen the
This
movie.
film.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, this
What's
goes
in
back
it?
to 1900, you know, when the immigrants were coming over,
Uh-huh.
mainly Jewish immigrants from Russia and socialists, you know,
Mhm.
because they just won, you know, May Day was the holiday.
Yeah.
And, but it was really fascinating, the beautiful building that these people built
Hmm.
on their own. This is when the Bronx was virgin land. There was nothing built, so they were pushing people out from Manhattan.
Mhm.
And they were all the labor, you know, they were the garment district and all of that. So they were the workers, but now so they decided if we get this land, we could all put some money in, get this mortgage, you know, and start building. And it's really incredible.
Hmm.
It has a history now. It's no longer a there's one building that's still a cooperative, but they're huge what they built. And
Co-op city.
it could not be, it can be done. It can be done. And we don't think about these things anymore
Right.
because it is, they socialized their costs. So
Right.
you know, other people will call this like a socialist move. However, but that's what we do in this country. We socialize our costs. We have the libraries and everything else.
Right.
So it's just you're the builders.
Yeah.
It's a film that you should know about. And there was another one. I actually have the pamphlet.
Is
from
this
last
it,
night.
Randy? Is this about the Bronx?
It was the Bronx. And it's
Right.
really a fascinating story. And the other one was Penn South. So look at that. There's a film on
At
that
Home
as
in
well.
Utopia, is that the name of it?
I'm not sure about that,
Yeah.
but it is, you can get it at Archive. I'll let you take a copy of this one before you leave. Anyway, it's a fascinating, different way of looking at things that we don't do anymore.
Yeah.
And it's something we should look at. Anyway, throwing it out
I
there.
gotta say,
But it would be an interesting experiment for county government to do. Or to foster and really let people have some ownership, but it doesn't accumulate your wealth. There's the whole story of how it was done.
I lived through,
I know you lived
I lived
there.
through that when I was in New York, when I grew up in New York. And it was a successful program in many ways, except one, it was considered exclusionary to some extent. People were fleeing from the inner city neighborhoods, investing in co-op city development. But I mean, it did work out for the best at the end of the day. I would like to see the next step of this process being a financial breakdown, potential revenue sources. I know that, for instance, the retirement board has a lease that they renew at a big price. Would love to come onto the, you know, we have bringing in the extension service, possibly bringing in the Cape Cod Commission would save us some bucks. So, you know, energy efficiency would save us some bucks. Potential ground lease for housing and maybe an annual fee. So, I mean, I know this is out of your bailiwick, but something we have to consider because that's going to be, the price tag is going to be.
Right. It's all connected at the end of the day. Yeah. I mean, our charge is really obviously the county complex and the building there, but we did start to think about how it is all connected, and it started to be like, you know, it could be really interesting that you're meeting a number of different needs. You're meeting the needs of, you know, county administration, but also the public and interface and potentially amenities on the site, and then meeting the housing demand, which clearly there is, you know, there's a need for it. So it could be a really interesting approach.
I would only add that, you know, Commissioner Bergstrom's point about the financial component is exactly what our next step is internally. So we'll begin to work on that. Going back to, you know, the utilization of a potential new building or even a potential renovated building, we've noted over the course of the last year how many different quasi-governmental entities have been looking for space, whether it's the DA's office, whether it's you know, our rep's office, you know, any number of different organizations are looking for space, and that's only going to get more and more difficult, you know, as residential housing prices increase, and the sort of the available commercial space begins to really shrink. So those that's not lost on us, and if there is an opportunity to provide that kind of space on some sort of rental relationship, then we're going to dig into that one as well.
It was 10 years ago, all those people had space on the county. They just didn't pay us anything. Until we were told that we had to get the leases up and, because it was just basically a handshake deal with a lot of.
Right, yeah,
Yeah.
everything was leased out for $1 for 90 days or something like that. And,
Yeah.
You know,
Those
not
times are
thinking that we ever had to pay for it. I'm not sure what the thinking was, but we weren't gonna tax anybody, that's for sure. Are we done? No, you.
We
more.
have just
We
a
have some more.
couple.
Just
Let's
a
wrap
couple,
up.
we can hit this really quickly.
Yeah.
This was just looking at, I think, I don't remember if that came out of the last meeting we had with you or other discussions, but just looking at what are the different, if you were to build a new building, we know what those costs would be. We worked with the cost estimator to develop that. That's on the right side of the screen.
Mhm.
But then the other scenario is, you could build, a building and you could pay rent on that over a period of years. And so what would that look like? You'd spend roughly $35 million likely in that vicinity. But then at the end of that lease term, you don't have an asset. Whereas if you build it, obviously you do. So just different ways of looking at it.
And I know historically the courts would love us out of here in some, they would love
Yeah.
the space themselves. So, and I'm sure there's that need. They also need. So it would be a win there as well.
And this goes to the looking at the revenue right now, the lease revenue for the courts, and you can see that column on the right side, the current lease amount. We just need to find out, kind of roughly what those are currently, and then we do have some ideas about how to compare that to current market rents for, and not for courthouse space, because that's just not going to be a comp we're going to be able to find, but just for kind of office use in Cape Cod. So we can continue to work on that comparison, just so you have that information.
Who determines the lease costs? I mean, who's the point person? If we say we
You mean what
want to
office?
increase it, who would we go to?
What office in the state?
Yeah, I mean, who?
What is that office that we go to? The governor.
It's the map.
I think we'd be dealing with DCAM and the trial courts.
Right.
The trial courts would be the big players in this.
Right.
We, side note, there's a lot of moving parts. I've been working with Michael and Carol, Vera, Don, our whole group internally. We've had a lot of conversations recently with the courts. Once this gets to be in the, finalized, there's some plans on some formal conversations with them about our lease, about the compensation. Obviously, we'd have to, through Michael, we'd have conversations with you before we send anything over, but there's definitely a glaring hole that, we're not getting financially compensated enough to be able to support these projects.
So when you say you're talking to the courts, who exactly, who are you talking, like the judges or the?
So
is there an
the
administrative
court
person
systems,
here?
the court system's a very interesting setup.
Mhm.
And there is a chief, I can't remember the title, is chief administrative, well, there's chief administrative judge. And then there's also a court administrator, trial court administrators, who's sort of the one that really makes the decisions. And then those decisions, I think, are approved by the chief judge. So we've had the court administrator down for a visit, very receptive to our arguments. Obviously, their constraint is funding, state funding, and they're not well funded.
And they know, so they would be, I'm sorry.
I gotta say that going back quite a while now, a couple of decades, there was a dispute between the administration and the legislature and the courts, because the courts wouldn't accept their patronage requests. I don't know if you remember, these are days of Bill Bulger and stuff like that. So the courts could not go and get anything from the state, but I assume that's all mended now, because ultimately the legislature is going to have to pass a budget that's going to include this.
Right.
Right.
But we would probably have the support of the court going forward, because it would benefit them,
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah.
I would think so.
I would hope.
Well, the other thing is there may be aspects of the plan that, and maybe we need to spend more time identifying this, but there may be some things that they want and they need. I think one way to get them on board in terms of leasing
Yeah.
financial arrangement that's beneficial to us and works is having aspects of this overall program obviously provide some things that maybe they want. Now, do we know if there are things that they want the courts need aside from having more space here?
More space is primary among them. I think more, along with more space. I mean, I think they'd like to see some revisions into the flow of people coming into the building.
In the parking
I've
is
heard
always
that
something.
parking is an
needs to
issue.
Yeah.
Even if nothing else was
Right.
done, that would have to be
Yeah.
redone so that it
So I think the
is
things that,
maximized.
yeah, I think the things that we're gonna need to identify is that as we sort of whittle down the options
Yeah,
and begin
we'll
to really
see, things will.
identify the things that can be in the plan that they're gonna be very excited about.
Mhm.
I think that's gonna be incredibly important, because I think what we're looking for is, I mean, as Sheila said, internal support, but, you know, if we get the legislative and political support, you know, in the legislature with our legislators and delegation, it'd be nice to be able to say that it's something that the courts are thrilled with, or at least, you know, very supportive of. You know, that will certainly help. Anything that we can do to generate, you know, support in other allies. Obviously, we're gonna need support here in the community, but,
Yeah,
you know,
that's probably that's the most important. I
yeah,
think,
that's gonna be the most important.
'cause it will impact. The
Yeah, I mean, you know, what you're talking about when you know, has the potential to be very, very exciting.
It does.
It does. You know, it's converting what we often view as liabilities, and turning them into opportunities to create something special that adds to the flavor, that adds to the ambiance, that adds to the aesthetic, that enhances the historic
Yes.
aspects of things. You know, when I think about building new, it's like, can you build new, but also build it in a way that
It
you
looks
know,
old.
it looks old? Exactly. It fits. It fits. People say that fits. You know, I mean, I love this.
Right.
I can't wait till we get done fixing this courthouse out.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's such
Exactly.
an iconic structure.
Mhm.
You know, the Quincy granite and all the stories about it. But in building companion facilities, you know, having them,
To
you know,
complement.
complement and accentuate what's here, you know?
And
I'm not
that's-
suggesting that with the new buildings have to be made of Quincy granite, but you know what I
Right.
mean.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and that costs to have those enhancements, but those are things that we'll have to think about as we go forward.
Mhm.
Okay,
That was the last.
but that's it.
That's it.
Well,
All
we
right.
were told this was gonna be a long meeting that you had.
And you
So
did.
we were prepared. We were
And
prepared for
we
this. Don't feel
very
like
much
you've worn us out.
appreciate
Yeah.
all of this work. It really is amazing and a
You guys did a
lot for
great
us to
job.
think about. And once we have other questions, I guess we'll be ready to call you back in. Answer all
For
our
sure.
concerns.
Well, we
whether
have
they
to, the
conflict
reality
or
is
not.
we have to do something. And there are things that you've identified some low hanging fruit for us.
Mhm.
All right, and that's a huge help.
And I think having that public space here too, this sort of like the atrium area, and that is very important to this community. And it brings in the community, that we're not just this structure on a hill that
Mhm.
is this sanitized thing. It's part of the community, because that's what government's all about. We are the
Mhm.
government, correct? So,
Well, I'm
Anyway.
looking forward to the ribbon cutting when this.
yeah, well, we hopefully
Well,
we'll-
well,
if
100
we're
years old.
alive. If we're alive. That's right, we're gonna pawn this off on somebody else, and God knows what the thing is. Okay, excellent work. Thank you.
Thank you very
Good
much.
to see you all again.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
for coming in. All right, so now we're moving on to new business. Does anyone have any new business? Recently? Anybody?
Well, just the meeting we went to. we attended,
Yes,
That
that was interesting, that we're all sort of facing.
yeah. What was it?
Thank you.
The thing's not working right now. What do we do?
We came out with a conclusion.
Oh,
yeah.
the county committee, Massachusetts Commissioners Association.
There you go. It's all set to come back.
No, but it's sort of reviewing what we did and, or what we discussed, which was shared problems. And how do we work together to kind of tackle or make a case to the state?
Yeah, I
Some of
think,
these.
I think the point is that we're, all these shared issues, we're all wrestling with the same thing, leases that are not sufficiently valued, revenues that, need to be enhanced. Right, and the idea is to figure out how can we work together,
Right,
as commissioners, as an association, so to help all the counties
They
in
have,
Massachusetts, rather than going it alone.
they have recommended legislation, which I don't know if includes us.
I think we signed on.
It's pushing for the legislature, but they make an exception for us because we get a different deal, but hopefully we'll see if it comes true.
Okay, so do we want to,
We got the consent agenda.
the consent, are we going to talk about this?
Is there anything in the consent agenda that we need to pull out, Michael? Is there something here that you would like to draw our attention to? I know we've
Well,
got.
I do want to just mention, because it is very important and scary for a lot of people, you know, it's a thing that none of us want, is that the annual suicide prevention proclamation and the Suicide Prevention and Action Month is coming up, so we're endorsing that and making a proclamation. We're also recognizing Lisa Oliver, who is the president and CEO of the Cooperative Bank, who has really led that bank to be a cooperative and work with the community and brought it to where it is today. And
I'd like to know how the dredging project in Mashpee got titled The Longer, Wider and Deeper. Is it sort of a take up on Big Beautiful project or?
hopefully not.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Is it maybe at our future meeting, Ken can update us on how that name. I've never seen. We typically just approve a dredging, you know, in a town or
Well,
in a
maybe
bay.
the town came up with that
Yeah.
because they want to be special.
But this now has its own name: Longer, Wider, and Deeper.
All right.
Okay,
Madam Chair, just because we are issuing an official citation to Lisa Oliver, I'll quickly read what we have here. It says, the Barnstable County Board of Regional Commissioners is proud to recognize Lisa J. Oliver for her exemplary leadership and unwavering dedication to the Cape Cod community. Since becoming the first female president in the 104-year history of the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod, Lisa J. Oliver has driven substantial growth while deepening the bank's commitment to the region. Under her guidance, the bank's assets have doubled to more than $1.6 billion during the COVID pandemic. Her leadership streamlined the loan application process for local and small businesses, efficiently processing 1,400 loans and distributing more than $120 million through the Paycheck Protection Program. In 2018, Lisa J. Oliver established the Cooperative Bank of Cape Cod Charitable Foundation Trust, which has since provided over $1 million in grants to nonprofit organizations in Barnstable County. Her commitment to the community extends to her service as chair of the board of the Cape Cod Chamber of Commerce and as an appointed charter member of the Canal Bridges Task Force, advocating federal funds to replace Cape Cod's critical aging bridges. The Barnstable County Board of Regional Commissioners commends Lisa J. Oliver for her significant contribution and steadfast commitment to the betterment of Cape Cod. Her achievements are a testament to her visionary leadership and dedication to community service, and it's signed by Sheila Lyons, Chair, Mark Forrest, Vice Chair, and Ronald Bergstrom, Commissioner, on this date,
right.
The 13th day of August. Oh, there it is.
So we,
I'd like to make a motion,
yes,
Madam Chair. I'd move to authorize the commissioner's action, otherwise referred to as our consent agenda, items 8A through 8N as listed on the August 13th, 2025 agenda.
Second.
all in
Actually,
favor?
could I just, before you vote on your revised agenda, we did want to carve out 8K because the work that 8K is anticipating is not going to happen because the sale fell through on an affordable housing unit. So if you could just carve out 8K.
8A through 8N minus 8K.
Exactly.
Okay, that's
Okay.
the revised motion.
All right,
Is that a revised
as
second?
amended, we have a second.
Second amendment, but a quick question. Who was the original source of the funding that didn't come through? You know?
It wasn't funding. It wasn't our funding. It was a house transfer, affordable house transfer, and the sale fell through.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
I'll second the, and that's it. Right?
All right.
Yep.
It's been, the amended motion has been second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, moving along, we are now on commissioners' reports. We kind of touched on it with one, our little jaunt there to Fall River. Anything else?
I have nothing to add.
Nope.
No? Okay. The only thing I will add is I do recommend people take a look at, this was an interesting film. Anybody that's interested in housing projects and housing development and the activists out there, there is a website called Archive Project at psss.org. And that stands for the Penn South Project, Penn South Archive Project.
Mhm.
And there is a film out there called The Cooperatives, which is also a very interesting look at people getting together and kind of taking some things in their own, taking control. So I just thought that more and more we might need to be able to do that. And since there might not be anybody else that we could go to. So
Sounds good.
with that, any upcoming business? What is our upcoming business? Our next meeting is going to be on the 27th. We'll be doing okay, so we're going to be looking at the resolution for the charter.
Yep.
We're going to have the Human Rights Advisory, and you know, they had their day in Hyannis, and I missed it, and I felt so bad. But I want to thank, it's Lisa, correct? Leslie. She is doing a great
Did they
job.
send us an invitation or did notify us?
I think it was noted in a meeting that we had with her and an update, and I'm not sure if we did get it, and if we did, we didn't mark it down, but I looked at all of the reports on that, and it was just fabulous, and I really felt bad that we missed it, because we should. They're doing really good work for a lot of people. So I think people should check out the Human Rights Commission and see the work they're doing. Other than that, we're going to pass it over to Mr. Dutton.
All right, thank you. I will add just on Human Rights Advisory Commission, Leslie's done a great deal of work with the Capes Police Chiefs and immigration advocates to just try to develop or redevelop a level of trust between police departments and the immigrant community. And so that work is ongoing, and I think that group is meeting in the Mary Pat room coming up. But that work has been invaluable to the community. What else? I just wanted to remind you, I think you've all received an invitation to a tour of Joint Base Cape Cod, which is coming up on September 5th.
No, it's changed to 26th. Is it? Am I?
No, that's
the open
different.
house.
That's
right.
it. That's Mass Tech.
Yeah.
So this is just a tour of the base. If anybody's interested,
Yes.
let me know and I'll forward you.
And what is the date?
Friday, September 5th.
What time?
I'm not sure of the time. I believe it's in the morning,
Okay.
but why don't I just send out
Yeah, you can send us some
information.
details. I have office hours that day, so I am tied up in the morning. Otherwise, I'd love to go if it's in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Well, I'll resend it.
Yeah, and if there's a way to move it to the afternoon, would that work better for folks?
I could probably do either. I don't know, but
I'll ask.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
that's-
could. 9 o'clock.
you can't change your hours.
Yeah, pretty much first Friday every month.
And then just a reminder, as the chair brought up, your meeting at Mass TC will be on September 26th, Friday, September 26th. We've moved it from the 24th, your normal meeting date, to Friday, September 26th, because the 24th, I understand, is a Jewish holiday. So we
Yes.
moved that. Just along the lines of upcoming business, Christy Senatori has indicated she'll be coming in to give you an update on the regional policy plan at one of your September meetings. You're also going to get a update from IT. You're also going to get Q4 results from Finance Director Carol Capola at your upcoming meeting as well. So those are coming up. The last thing I have is in your packets, I put proposed valuation timeline for me and a proposed draft form, which I think is pretty straightforward and has tried to make it as easy as possible. So that is in your packet. So I would encourage you to look at that and just if you like it, we can adopt it at your next meeting. And if you want to make changes to anything, just reach out and I can make some changes to it. And I believe that's it for me
Great.
for right now.
Yeah, what I'd like to do is the item in the proposed timeline, we identify September 24th as a date to discuss this and approve this. Now, the question I have is, would it be better to take it up on the September 10th meeting?
Which one are you talking
I'm
about?
talking about this
Oh,
timeline.
Yes,
Yeah, would it be best, I think, rather than taking it up while we're out at the Mass Tech at Center, it might make sense to put that on the agenda
right.
for the 10th. Does that work for people?
And it does for me.
Okay, that would be great.
So we'll change that to the 10th.
And that said, there's only one other item.
Madam Chair, I move to attend.
And I will second that at 12:01 PM.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone, for all your work. And